Hello and welcome to this exploring session, and today we are concluding our work on the true tragedy of Richard III, which has proved so far to be a absolutely fascinating experience. I've really enjoyed it so far. There have been some astoundingly brilliant scenes, some really interesting questions about what to do with some of the material. The question of who is Buckingham is still very much up in the air, which is a shame because he's dead. We go careering into the last section of the play as Richard is about to encounter his nemesis of Richmond. I don't think you should say it Richmond. I'm just saying it this way because I'm currently rehearsing something where I have to say Richmond and I keep saying Richard and it goes horribly, horribly wrong and changes the narrative of things. So it's irritating. They have in this play quite similar names. This is a minor private peeve that has nothing to do with the play whatsoever. Anyway, just call him Henry. Anyway. As we go into this final stretch, we have, as usual, a wonderful team of people to read on. We're going from midway through what we're classing as scene 14, though perhaps more properly it should be called scene 15. And so the team today, performing Richard himself today will be...
Liza Graham, actor, singer, and Renaissance text coach, 2 actors in London.
And performing Lovell and George today is...
Hello, Dan, actor in Montpellier, France.
Performing Catesby today will be...
Hello, my name's Simon Nader, and I'm an actor and director living in Hertfordshire.
And today performing Report and Men is...
Hi, I'm Ruth Evans. I'm a specialist in medieval literature, and I live in St. Louis in the Midwest of the US.
Today performing the nemesis himself, Richmond, is...
Hi, I'm Valentina, and I'm an Italian actor and voiceover artist in London.
Today reading Paige and Elizabeth is...
Hi, I'm Tamara. I am an actor. I am usually in London, currently in Germany, and I don't remember how many times I've said this.
It's deja vu all over again. Performing to Stanley today is...
Hi, I'm Alan Scott, based in Suffolk, and I'm neither an actor nor an academic.
Today reading The Messenger. Boy, there's a fair amount of that messaging going on today is...
Hello, I'm Helen Good. I'm a historian and I regard The Messenger as fundamentally email.
Performing Oxford today will be...
Hi, I'm Francis Cox. I'm an actor living in Amsterdam.
And not reading today and representing, say, more Cambridge than Oxford is our guest.
Hi, I'm Jitka Stolova. I'm a Title A Fellow in English Literature at Trinity College, Cambridge, and I work on the portrayal of Richard III.
And finally, reading Blunt and the Queen, or the Mother Queen, is...
Hello, I'm Sarah Blake. I'm an actor, writer and director living in Germany.
And I am, if I haven't missed anybody else, I am your host, Robert Crighton. I'm going to attempt to guide us through these last stages of the play. And I say we hit our limit on halfway through a relatively long scene 14. And scene 14 could be said to be Richard going into paranoid overdrive in monologue and in dialogue with Catesby. And then it brings on Stanley as a potential member of his armed forces, and as surety is going to take Stanley's son George aside as surety of his good favour, and George, of course, could potentially end up very, very dead. Just to help us ease into the second half of the scene, I'm going to ask us all just back up a little bit. So if we could actually go from Stanley's speech to the audience, I am to advise myself upon a secret cause, which I quite like? It starts off very much as a decision spotlight, Brechtian address to the audience, what am I going to do now, before it opens out into the rest of the scene, and then we enter stuff we haven't read before yet. So going back, before we go forward, Stanley, sir.
I am to advise myself upon a secret cause, and of a matter that concerns me near. Say that I leave my son unto the king, and that I should but aid Earl Richmond, my son George Stanley dies. But if my faith be kept unto my prince, George Stanley lives. Well, I will accept the king's proffer. And please your grace, I am content, and will leave my son to pledge.
Here, come hither, and with thee take this lesson. Thou art set free for our defence. Thou shalt upon thy pledge make this promise, not only to stay the hindrance of the earl, but to prevent his purpose with thy power. Thou shalt not seek by any means to aid or rescue him. This done, of my life thy son doth live. But otherwise thy son dies, and thou too, if I catch thee. And it shall go hard, but I will catch thee.
And you shall go apace, and yet go without me. But I humbly take my leave of your grace. Farewell, George.
How now? What, do you give him letters?
No, my lord, I've done. The second sight is sweet for such a son.
And exit Stanley.
Carry George Stanley to prison.
Alas, my lord, shall I go to prison?
Shall you go to prison? What a question's that? So prick the lamb and wound the dam. How likest thou this, Catesby?
Oh, my lord, so excellent that you have imprisoned his son.
Nay, now we will look to the rest. But I sent the Lord Lovell to the Mother Queen concerning my suit to her daughter Elizabeth. But see, in good time, here he is. How now, Lovell, what news? What saith the Mother Queen to my suit?
My lord, very strange she was at the first, but when I had told her the cause, she gave consent, desiring your majesty to make the nobility privy to it.
God a mercy, Lovell. But what said Lady Elizabeth?
Why, my lord, strange as woman will be at the first, but through entreaty of her mother, she quickly gave consent, and the queen willed me to tell your grace that she means to leave sanctuary and to come to the court with all her daughters.
Ay, marry, Lovell, let not that opportunity slip. Look to it, Catesby. Be careful for it, Lovell, for thereby hangs such a chance that may enrich us and our heirs forever. But, sirs, heard ye nothing of the Scottish nobles that meet at Nottingham to confer about the marriage of my niece?
Not a word, my lord.
And enter a messenger.
God's wounds, who is that? Search the villain. Has he any dags about him?
No, my lord, I have none.
From whence comest thou?
From the peers at Nottingham and Scotland, and they greet your majesty.
Sirrah, is the marriage concluded between the Scottish Earl and the fair Lady Rosa?
Prithee, tell us, is it concluded?
How sayest thou? Is it concluded?
Nay, will you give me leave to tell you that? Why, you villains, will you know the secrets of my letter by interrupting messengers that are sent to me? Away, I say, be gone. It is time to look about. Away, I say. What? Here yet, villains.
My lord, I have something to say besides.
Then speak it! What hast thou to say?
This, my lord. When the peers of England and Scotland met at Nottingham together to confer about the marriage of your niece, it was straight determined that she should be married with the Scottish Earl. And further, my lord, the council commanded me to deliver unto your grace the treasons of Captain Blunt, who had the Earl of Oxford in charge at Hames Castle. Now they are both fled, and purposeth to aid the Earl of Richmond against your grace. Now, my lord, I take my leave.
Messenger, stay. Hath Blunt betrayed? Doth Oxford rebel and aid the Earl of Richmond? May this be true? What, is our prison so weak, our friends so fickle, our ports so ill looked to, that they may pass and repass the seas at their pleasures? Then everyone conspires, spoils our conflicts, conquers our castles, and arms themselves with their own weapons unresisted? O villains, rebels, fugitives, thieves, how are we betrayed when our own swords shall beat us, and our own subjects seek the subversion of the state, the fall of their prince, and sack of their country? Of his? Nay, neither must nor shall. For I will army with my friends and cut off my enemies, and beard them to their face that dares me, and but one, I one, beyond the seas that troubles me. Well, his power is weak, and we are strong. Therefore I will meet him with such melody that the singing of a bullet shall send him merrily to his longest home. Come, follow me.
And the scene ends. Meeting with such melody that the singing of a bullet shall send him merrily to his longest home. Oh, I like that. There's lots of interesting questions here. I love the little details of the paranoia. It's not just, he's hugging his son goodbye. It's, are you giving him letters? And then, the paranoia as the messenger comes in, search him, make sure he's not armed. The fighting over who all these people surrounding him, and when he says messenger stay, does the messenger stay or leave?
He stays.
Does he? I mean, there's no indication that he stays or goes. It's just there's part of me. If I was that messenger, I'd get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah, but the point is that the letter has been given to Richard, and it's Catesby and the page are asking Richard what's in the letter. But the messenger has also been given word of mouth, which was quite common with messages. That quite often it's said in the letter, and the person who brings this will be able to inform you further.
It's the way they're all sort of crowding around. What's the news? What's the news? What's the news? It's just,
but the messenger stays because he's got word of mouth.
No, I mean when it says messenger stay at the end of the before the final speech.
In the final speech, I think the messenger might stay because the speech ends with "Come, follow me."
Well, I was just wondering about the other people in the room there. You see. It's just I just flag it up. I don't think there is a specific answer.
But everyone else has left, haven't they? He told them to go away.
Did chuck all of them out, yeah, except for the messenger.
Yeah, and I think he's then going to send the messenger off. He's kept the messenger because he's going to use him as a messenger.
But he says here, yet villains.
Maybe
they
so.
Haven't left, surely.
Lovell hasn't left, as far as I can see.
Yeah,
it's the question of who stays and who goes. Simon.
No, I'd also say I'd expect the messenger would stay to see if there's anything to relay back. I would suspect, unless of course this is the coining of don't shoot the messenger because Richard did in fact shoot him with a singing bullet. Yeah.
Well, it's the invisible swordsman. No, it's just the way he says, "Now, my lord, I take my leave." It just feels very much like he's running away. And
I think he wants
probably with
to.
a gesture, like
But Richard has said, messenger, stay. I reckon he stays.
Alan?
I would think, actually, yes, he stays on stage, but he's probably shuffling backwards as unobtrusively as he can manage. Getting out at sword's length at least.
Because it seems to be the game in this scene is, where are all his followers placing themselves? Because having placed themselves near a person of power, a lot of them might want to be backing away from it as well, and what the other people in the room are doing as well.
I'd say it's a good excuse to see the volatility of Richard as well, perhaps, because if it's like, messenger stay, and then what? And then contradict immediately, then that kind of sets up some nice character work, I think.
So I like to set the odd hair. Any additional thoughts about this scene, especially in connection with what came before? I mean, it's very much, we see Richard's total deterioration throughout this scene. He's considering where the scene started, which we looked at yesterday, with Richard's sort of very paranoid thing about this crown that's turned to flames, fiery flames on his head, and it's and the way he's interacting with everybody else, it's not quite with it. Nothing else. Okay, let's move forward then. Scene 15 as we have it here. Enter Earl Richmond, Earl of Oxford. Somebody else? who I don't know if he says anything, and Captain Blunt.
Welcome, dear friends and loving countrymen. Welcome, I say, to England's blissful isle, whose forwardness I cannot but commend, that does to aid us in our enterprise. My right it is, and sole inheritance, and Richard but usurps in my authority. For in his tyranny he slaughtered those that would not succour him in his attempts, whose guiltless blood craves daily at God's hands. Revenge for outrage done to their armless lives. Then courage, countrymen, and never be dismayed. Our quarrel's good, and God will help the right. For we may know that by dangers we have passed, that God, no doubt, will give us victory.
If love of gold or fear of many foes could once have damned us in our attempts, thy foot had never touched the English shore. And here Earl Oxford plights his faith to thee, never to leave in what we have undertaken, but follow still with resolution, till thou be crowned as conqueror in the field, or lose thy life in following of thy right. Thy right, brave Richmond, which we will maintain, Morgar, the proudest bird of Richmond's brood. Then, cousin Richmond, being resolved thus, let us straight to arms, and God and St. George for us.
As this brave earl have said, so say we all. We will not leave thee till the field be won, which, if with fortunate success we can perform, think then, Earl Richmond, that I followed thee, and that shall be honour enough for me.
And then I think that's Landois speaking.
It is.
Yeah.
I apologise on that, yes. So saith Landois, that honours Richmond so with love unfeigned for his valour past, that if your honour lead the way to death, Peter Landois hath sworn to follow thee. For if Queen Mother do but keep her word, and what the peers have promised be performed, touching the marriage with Elizabeth, daughter to our King Edward IV, and by this marriage join in unity those famous houses, Lancaster and York, then England shall no doubt have cause to say Edward's coronation was a joyful day, and 'tis is all Landois desires to see.
Thanks, Landois. And here Earl Richmond's vows. If their kind promises take but effect, that as they have promised I be made king, I will so deal in governing the state, which now lies like a savage sheltered grove, where brambles, briars, and thorns overgrow these sprigs, which if they might but sprig to their effect, and not be crossed so by their contraries, making them subject to these outrages, would prove such members of the commonweal, that England should in them be honoured as much as ever was the Roman state, when it was governed by the council's rule. And I will draw my sword, brave countrymen, and never leave to follow my resolve, till I have mowed those brambles, briars, and thorns that hinder those that long to do us good.
Why, we have escaped the dangerous brunt of all, which was his garrison at Milton Haven. Shall we dismay or daunt our friends to come, because he took the Duke of Buckingham? No, worthy friends and loving countrymen, Oxford did never bear so base a mind. He will not wink at murders secretly put up, nor suffer upstarts to enjoy our rights, nor live in England under a usurping king, and this is Oxford's resolution.
But Blunt, look who's that knocks.
My lord, 'tis a messenger from the Mother Queen, and the Lady Stanley, your mother, with letters.
Admit him straight. Now shall we hear some news?
And so enter a decidedly different, even though by the same voice, messenger.
Long live Earl Richmond. The Mother Queen doth greet your honour.
Welcome, my friend. How fares our mother and the rest?
In health, my lord, and glad to hear of your arrival safe.
My friend, my mother hath written to me of certain that are coming in our aid, the report of whose names are referred to thee to deliver.
First, there's the Lord Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury's son and heir, with a brave band of his own. There is also the Lord Fitzherbert, the Earl of Pembroke's son and heir. Of the gentlemen of the Welsh, there's Sir Rhys ap Thomas, and Sir Thomas ap Richard, and Sir Owen Williams, brave gentlemen, my lord. These are the chief.
Are these the full number of all that come?
Only 2 more, my lord, which I've left unnamed. One is Sir Thomas Dennis, a Western gentleman that joined with him, one Arnold Butler. A great many are willing, but dares not come as yet.
Doth Arnold Butler come? I can hardly brook his treachery, for he it was that wrought my disgrace with the...
Well, my lord, we are now to strengthen ourselves with friends, and not to reap up old quarrels. Say that Arnold Butler did injure you in time of peace. The mend is twice made, if he stand with you in the time of wars.
Well, my friend, take this for thy good news, and commend me to our mother and the rest. Thus, my lords, you see God still provides for us. But now, my lords, touching the placing of our battle best, and how we may be least endangered. Because I will be foremost in this fight to encounter with that bloody murderer, myself will lead the forward of our troop. My lord of Oxford, you as our second self, shall have the happy leading of the rear, a place I know which you will well deserve, and Captain Blunt, Peter Landois, and you shall buy in quarters as our battle scouts, provided. Thus, your bowmen, Captain Blunt, must scatter here and there to gall their horses, as also when that are promised friends to come, then must you hold hard skirmish with our foes, till I, by cast of a countermarch, have joined our power with those that come to us. Then, casting close as wings on either side, we will give a new bravado on the foe. Therefore, let us towards Otherstones amain, where we this night, God willing, will encamp. From thence towards Lichfield we will march next day, and nearer London bid King Richard play.
And they all exit. So yes, this is very much Richmond's as planning Zoom meeting for the coming events here. I think Helen saying the messenger is very much email. There's some fascinating Welsh gentlemen coming up for the fight. Always nice to see. I don't know the backstory of Arnold Butler. It sounds like it's an interesting little detail that sort of just comes up. Him.
I've just been looking him up, and all I could find was a Welsh politician that was born in 1521.
So that wouldn't be him.
Yeah, exactly. So I can't find any other references. So I love the name. It's just a comedy name, isn't it?
It's a bit ploddingly, provincial, isn't it? It's not like Oxford and Blunt and Arnold.
Yeah. Arnold Butler.
Ready
to fight.
I wonder if it might be an in-joke. I wonder if it might be the name of a clown with the company or something.
Yeah.
It does feel weirdly unhistorical, doesn't it?
Or a pub landlord they'd fallen out with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or insert a name for each performance here. It's a tricksy scene because it is primarily about showing it seems to be about showing Richmond to be this, great figure, very raw, and setting up battle-y things, and it's a lot of it's just setting up plot and exposition and stuff. Late in the day as well. So it's the kind of scene that it's quite difficult to make exciting. I think it needs momentum. It needs that sense of gathering forces. I don't know how other people found that and thoughts about this scene.
I had the feeling that there was a big board with names on that they were giving ticks to or crossing off. That these were important names. And I mean, rather than having your usual little map or something. I wasn't sure whether the messenger would have a whole pile of papers that he was leafing through saying, yeah, there's Fitzherbert and Talbot and Rhys ap Thomas, or is that Thomas ap Richard? Oh, these Welsh. Or whether he was actually dredging them from something that he had carefully learnt by rote, so that if he was captured, nothing that was taken would give anything away.
I suspect it's the latter in terms of what the text is saying, but I really like that idea of, maybe he's not so much the messenger, but he's the person who's being handed all the paper from the various clerks coming in from other messengers, and he's sort of like, yeah, we've got this, oh, news just in, we've got this, and in thinking about how we might do it today. Liza, I see you.
Well, I wonder, I mean, I don't know how much information we have, Yitka and Daniel in particular, how much information we have on the context of how this play was originally, for whom this play was originally performed. But if it's possible that people would have had ancestors that fought at Bosworth, and any noble that saw this play would be like, oh, are they going to mention my ancestor? Tick, yes, they did. I'll give these players some money.
Well, it's the considering if it is Queen's Men, which the say the printed version says it is, then yeah, that kind of clientele quite possibly lingering somewhere in the background. I wouldn't be surprised. Any thoughts on that from anyone else? Yitka, please.
Well, one thing absolutely. As what you were saying, there would be people who would have had their great-grandfathers fighting in that battle at that point, the 100 years. I just wanted to mention, coming back to Richmond's speech, it's interesting how he positions himself. His first words in the play are, "Welcome, dear friends and loving countrymen, to England's blissful isle." He is welcoming whom? Foreigners? He himself is in exile. He's an Englishman, but living in Brittany. So he is partly an exile and partly the person who says, "Welcome to England," with people who actually join him on his mission. And I find it striking that we have talked in the first session about the significance of names and that interaction between Shore's wife and the way she addresses Lodovick. And the repetition of the name Peter Landois, who was a real person at that point, but it really emphasizes you, it reminds you of the fact that this is a broad coalition of foreigners, partly French, definitely people from Brittany, and there will be other works like the Bosworth Field in the 1620s that give Richard the sense of, I am defending my country against a foreign invasion. And we are reminded of that foreign element here.
I think that's a really good point. At this time, though, I think England would have been in possession of several pieces of France. Although it does get foggy because they swapped hands so many times. But that might be why Richard's phrasing it that way.
I see Sarah first.
Mm-hmm. It's just occurred to me one way you could stage this, just off the back of what Yitka was saying there. You could, that speech, "Welcome, I say, to England's blissful isle." I mean, he could do that. He could almost come on stage on his own and say that to the audience, like he's rallying the troops, like he's getting them. I'm not saying this is how they did it. I'm saying this is how you could do it now. Like he's getting the audience like on his side, and then you could almost have Oxford, Blunt, and Landois. And then later the messenger, like planted in the audience, or at least coming in from different parts through the audience, like, "Oh yeah, I'm here, I'm joining you," and then "Yes, me too, I'm coming in." Then they kind of come towards the stage, and it gives the scene that sense of forces massing, some movement and people coming together. I don't know, it might be quite a nice way to give the scene a bit of a dynamic.
I like that, and I also, it's worth noting Richmond's positive language as he starts. "Welcome, dear, loving, welcome, blissful, commend, aid. That, you know, as Richard goes darker and darker, we've now got, you know, not the son of York, but the Rose of Lancaster.
Yes, Helen.
Yes, I think it's worth pointing out that an enormous number of these people were Welsh, not English. So at the time of the action, they were technically foreigners. By the time you get to when the play was written, there was dual nationality. So Wales was subsumed into England by that time. But at this point that we're talking about, and this would have been known, the Welsh were foreign in England. So there is that. The other thing that I thought was interesting was the promises that everybody was making to Richmond was that they wouldn't run away in the battle. I mean, that was the main thing. I will not desert.
Which may or may not be setting up an important plot point for later on.
Well, I did wonder how we're meant to respond to the Arnold Butler thing about, you know, that he has this reputation for being treacherous, and you could see it as, you know, setting up the scene for kind of disruption in the ranks of these people. But then the whole thing about the mend is twice made if he stand with you in the time of war. So I think we're meant to see Richmond as being able to bring everyone together, even those who have dissented in the past.
And it's interesting. It's another scene following on from the latter end of the last scene where we've got disparate forces outside of just some rich noblemen doing some rich noblemen fighting things. You know, Richard is inordinately interested in what's going on in Scotland and Nottingham in the previous scene, and how that affects what's happening to them. And here we've got Welsh forces coming together. So it's Welsh, Scottish, overseas forces as well. So you've got all of these things are kept in play and up in the air. And I think again, it's part of that scope of a play that's very outward facing rather than inward facing as well. We've said a lot about this scene, which, you know, in many ways, which is great because it is on the face of it not the most, you know, it's not a Mistress Shaw scene, you know, kind of thing. It's lovely that we find things to talk about in that. We go on to the next scene, however, and we're going to meet again the page. So as we got it, scene 16, enter the page.
Where shall I find a place to sigh my fill and wail the grief of our sore troubled king? For now he hath obtained the diadem, but with such great discomfort to his mind that he had better lived a private man. His looks are ghastly, hideous to behold, and from the privy centre of his heart there come such deep-fetched sighs and fearful cries that, being with him in his chamber oft, he moves me weep and sigh for company. For if he hear one stir, he riseth up and clasps his hand upon his dagger straight, ready to stab him whatsoe'er he be. But he must think this is the just revenge the heavens have poured upon him for his sins. These peers which he unkindly murdered doth cry for justice at the hands of God, and he in justice sends continual fear, for to affright him both at bed and board. But stay, what noise is this? Who have we here?
Stage direction, enter men to go to Richmond.
How now, sirs? Whither are you going so fast?
Why, to Earl Richmond's camp to serve with him. For we have left to serve King Richard now.
Why, comes there any more?
A number more.
And exit the men.
Why, these are the villains my lord would have put his life into their hands. Oh, Richard, now do my eyes witness that thy end is at hand. For thy commons make no more count of thee than of a private man. Yet will I, as duty binds, give thee advertisements of their unjust proceedings. My master hath lifted out many, and yet hath left one to lift him out of all, not only of his crown, but also of his life. But I will in to tell my lord of what has happened.
And okay, that looks like we have a error in my pagination here for this is now going into looks to be an separate scene, so I'm just going to pause there. It's another one of these people passing through, commenting on and watching as the action occurs kind of scenes. I think that's really fascinating. And all the men, obviously. Ruth, excellent being all the men there.
Yeah, did I manage multiple voices together?
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. It's the description of Richard as well. He looks so ghastly. He's such a buzzkill now as well. He used to be fun. We were plotting all those murders, and now it's awful. I mean, it's he's being again setting up the image of Richard as this sort of haunted, broken figure.
It's the first time I think that the page has actually talked about the physical characteristics of Richard. He's not mentioned them before.
I also like that it's done with a speech by the page rather than two characters discussing what they should do. It's just a nice way of presenting Richard losing allies. I think that's quite clever, actually.
And the page has been so ambiguous all the way through this. Like, towards the beginning, before the princes were murdered, and he was talking about, never was the like seen in England or whatever. It's like you think, which way is he going to jump? Is he going to go with Richard, or is he actually condemning him here? And you could play it either way. And then of course he turns out to be very much on Richard's side. And then with this speech here, right up until the end of the speech, I was thinking, is he going to go? Is he going to go? Is he going to join Richmond? And then he was like, oh, no, I'm going to go and tell my lord what has happened. I'm like, yeah, he's sticking with Richard. But there's such an uncertainty with him all the way through. I think you could really play that up in a live performance. Like, he's just keeping an eye on what's going on. And he kind of encapsulates the whole situation in that way because everybody is just looking out for themselves and no one's quite sure which way to jump.
Yeah, he's articulating that sense of we've had all the way through. My master has lifted out many, and that rising status play that we've had all the way through. You're absolutely right, Alan. Yes,
I'm just thinking that the page has actually realised that he's in it so deep on Richard's side that his only possible hope of survival is to cleave even closer to him.
Possible.
Well, there are two virtues at war here, justice and loyalty. And the page does see that this is the just revenge the heavens have poured upon him for his sins. The word justice occurs quite a lot in the latter half of that speech. And then, but being disloyal is apparently a greater sin, especially for someone Richard has in his confidence.
Mm. Yes, and sometimes betraying people does lead to the person you betrayed therefore doesn't trust you because you're a betrayer. And sort of in the long term, it might be an easier way of staying alive. Actually, if you are an honourable servant to a dishonourable man, you might survive the course. Helen,
I've worked out who the page is. The big source for the bad Richard III is a manuscript in Thomas More's handwriting, which may or may not have come from Morton, the Bishop of Ely. Now, in that, there is a load of descriptions of how awful it was being Richard, and how he was racked by guilt and all the rest of it, which obviously came from within Richard's household if it wasn't invented. Now, I think that the page grew up and became the informant for the source on which this play is based.
Mm.
And that's why he's so central.
That's really intriguing.
There's a scene later on that may bear you out. Spoilers.
All I've done is highlighted my speech headings. This text I didn't work on.
Yeah. Okay. Any additional thoughts before we go into the next scene? Anybody want to jump in? No. Lovely. So the next scene, it is a known non-split scene. It has been unsplit in previous editions. That's why I managed to miss it, even though I have a note for it, because I'm an idiot. So as we go into scene 16B, enter Richmond and Oxford.
Good my lord, depart and leave me to myself.
I pray, my lord, let me go along with you.
My lord, it may not be, for I have promised my father that none shall come but myself. Therefore, good my lord, depart.
Good my lord, have a care of yourself. I like not these night walks and scouting abroad in the evening so disguised. For you must not, now that you are in the usurper's dominions, and you are the only mark he aims at. And your last night's absence bred such amazement in our soldiers that they, like men wanting the power to follow arms, were on a sudden more liker to fly than to fight. Therefore, good my lord, if I may not stand near, let me stand aloof off.
Content thee, good Oxford, and though I confess myself bound to thee for thy especial care, yet at this time I pray thee hold me excused. But farewell, my lord. Here comes my lord and father.
Enter Stanley and another.
Captain, I pray thee bring me word when thou first dost descry the enemy. And so farewell, and leave me for a while.
How fares my gracious lord and father?
In good health, my son, and the better to see thee thus forward in this laudable enterprise. But omitting vain circumstances, and to come briefly to the purpose, I am now in few words to deliver much matter. For know this, when I came to crave leave of the king to depart from the court, the king very furiously began to charge me that I was both acquainted with thy practices and drifts, and that I knew of thy landing, and by no means would grant me leave to go, till as pledge of my loyalty and true dealing with the king, I should leave my young son, George Stanley. Thus I've left my son in the hands of a tyrant, only a purpose to come and speak with thee.
But omitting this, I pray tell me, shall I look for your help in the battle?
Son, I cannot, for as I will not go to the usurper, no more I will not come to thee.
Why then it is bootless for us to stay, for all we presumed upon was on your aid.
My son, George Stanley's death would do you no pleasure.
Why the time it is too troublesome for him to tend to full execution.
Oh son, tyrants expect no time, and George Stanley being young and a gristle is the more easy to be made away.
This news goes to my heart, but 'tis in vain for me to look for victory when with a molehill we shall encounter.
My son, see how contrary you are, for I assure you the chiefest of his company are liker to fly to thee than to fight against thee. And for me, think me not so simple, but that I can at my pleasure fly to thee, or being with them, fight so faintly that the battle shall be won on thy part with small encountering. And not this besides, that the king is now come to Leicester, and means tomorrow to bid thee battle in Bosworth.
And enter messenger, which iteration, who knows?
Come, my lord, I do descry the enemy.
Why then, son, farewell, I can stay no longer.
Yet, good father, one word more ere you depart. What number do you think the king's power to be?
Marry, some 20,000, and so farewell.
And we, hardly 5,000, being beset with many enemies, hoping upon a few friends, yet to despair not, Richmond. But remember thou fightest in the right to defend thy country from the tyranny of an usurping tyrant. Therefore, Richmond, go forward. The more dangerous the battle is in attaining, it proves the more honourable being obtained. Then forward, Richmond. God and St. George for me. Quisque regno gauditit, o fallax bonum.
End of scene. As I'm sure you're all wondering, hang on, You're not my father. Thoughts are coming out everywhere. It seems to be some odd confusion party quirk of this particular play is that the author has got slightly confused about various in-law relationships going on. It's a bit weird. Helen?
It's not weird at all. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be so positive, should I? Stanley is married to Richmond's mother. So as far as Richmond is concerned, Stanley is his father. And although Richmond and George Stanley have absolutely no blood kinship whatsoever, because they're of completely different marriages between completely different people, nevertheless, they would regard themselves as brothers because of the marriage of their parents. And this was considered a very, very strong bond, even though blood wasn't involved. So, yeah, he would. I mean, Stanley would call him his son, and Richmond would call Stanley his father, even though it should be stepfather and stepson.
Is this William Stanley?
I think they were both called George, but I
George
could be
Stanley,
wrong.
isn't it?
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, okay, right.
There were two brothers, though, weren't there? I'm trying to remember. Was the brother William? The Stanley brothers.
Could be. I know there's a Stanley who Richmond executed when he was king. He had him executed for treason.
That was the brother. That was Stanley. That was Stanley, who was the father-in-law, the stepfather of Henry. That was his brother.
Right.
Has someone got a gloss on the Latin that we just had?
No, at the moment.
Isn't it something like whoever rejoices in the kingdom, that's a false good? Is that right? Something like that?
So it's like that.
It's something of that along those lines, I think. But I was just, wondering whether anybody was more conversant, because it's more years than I care to remember since I looked at Latin.
I think that's what it means. If you're taking pleasure in the kingdom, watch out, because that's not something you don't trust it.
Is it he who reigns in splendor? I'm just trying to think. Because Kingston Ragnar got it. He who reigns in splendor.
Where's
I don't know. Something like that. I'm just thinking gaudy.
No, that's rejoice.
It's
joyous. Rejoice.
Yes, he rejoices.
Either rejoice or enjoy.
Yeah, or enjoy the kingdom. Yeah.
Gaudeamus igitur.
But going back to the content of the scene, so this scene, Richmond going out beyond, dangerously, beyond his guard, meeting Stanley in secret. It's this. It's a really interesting the way that scene functions as well.
He's meeting in secret even from Oxford. And not only that, the jaw-dropping moment was when he was told that his step brother was in mortal danger, and he didn't give a damn.
He's terrified, isn't he? Like he clearly doesn't have the numbers, even though he's talking big, but he clearly knows that he doesn't have the numbers.
Yeah. And then the great farewell between Stanley and Richmond before the battle, shall we ever meet again, and all the rest of it. It was just one word more ere you depart. How many men are there on the other side? I mean, he's a very unsatisfactory emotionally for Stanley, who wants a bit more love.
Other thoughts on the scene? We feeling getting a bit into the head of Richmond a bit, you know, from the last scene, which was very out-facing rather than internal. Here we're getting that sense of, you know, the only way is forwards. You can't back out now. You either win or you die horribly. And let's put it in perspective. The hit rate and success of this kind of rebellion and enterprise is not high. So let's move on to the next scene. Enter King Richard and Lord Lovell.
The hell of life that hangs upon the crown, the daily cares, the nightly dreams, the wretched cruise, the treason of the foe, and horror of my bloody practice past, strikes such a terror to my wounded conscience that sleep I, wake I, or whatsoe'er I do, methinks their ghosts come gaping for revenge, whom I have slain in reaching for a crown. Clarence complains and crieth for revenge. My nephew's blood's revenge, revenge doth cry. The headless peers come pressing for revenge, and every one cries, let the tyrant die. The sun by day shines hotly for revenge. The moon by night eclipseth for revenge. The stars are turned to comets for revenge. The planets change their courses for revenge. The birds sing not but sorrow for revenge. The silly lambs sit bleating for revenge. The squeaking raven sits croaking for revenge. Whole herds of beasts come bellowing for revenge. And all, yea, all the world, I think, cries for revenge, and nothing but revenge. But to conclude, I have deserved revenge. In company I dare not trust my friend. Being alone I dread the secret foe. I doubt my food, lest poison lurk therein. My bed is uncouth, rest refrains my head. Than such a life I count far worse to be than 1,000 deaths unto a damned death. How was death, I said? Who dare attempt my death? Nay, who dares so much as once to think my death? Though enemies there be that would my body kill, yet shall they leave a never-dying mind. But you, villains, rebels, traitors as you are, how came the foe in, pressing so near? Where slept the garrison that should have beat them back? Where was our friends to intercept the foe? All gone, quite fled, his loyalty quite laid abed. Then vengeance, mischief, horror with mischance, wildfire with whirlwinds light upon your heads, that thus betrayed your prince by your untruth. Frantic man, what meanst thou by this mood? Now he is come, more need to beat him back.
Sour is sweet that favors thy delight. Great is his power that threats thy.
The bad rebellion of my foe is not so much as for to see my friends do fly in flocks from me.
May it please your grace, rest yourself content, for you have power enough to defend your land.
Dares Richmond set his foot on land with such a small power of straggling fugitives?
May it please your grace, participate the cause that thus doth trouble you.
The cause, buzzard? What cause should I participate to thee? My friends are gone away and fled from me. Keep silence, villain, lest I by post do send thy soul to hell. Not one word more if thou dost love thy life.
And enter Catesby.
My lord.
Yet again, villain. Oh, Catesby, is it thou? What, comes the Lord Stanley or no?
My lord, he answers no.
Why didst thou not tell him then I would send his son George Stanley's head to him?
My lord, I did so, and he answered he had another son left to make Lord Stanley.
Oh, villain vile, breaker of his oath. The bastard's ghost shall haunt him at the heels and cry revenge for his vile father's wrongs. Go, Lovell, Catesby, fetch George Stanley forth. Him with these hands will I butcher for the dead, and send his headless body to his sire.
Leave off executions. Now the foe is here that threatens us most cruelly of our lives.
Zounds, foe me no foes. The father's fact condemns the son to die.
But guiltless blood will for revengement cry.
Why, was not he left for father's loyalty?
Therein his father greatly injured.
Did not yourselves in presence see the bond sealed and assigned?
What, though my lord, the bardit's own, with titles doth resign.
The bond is broke, and I will sue the fine, except you will hinder me. What? Will you have it so?
Doing true justice, else we answer no.
His treacherous father hath neglect his word, and done impartial past by dint of sword. Therefore, Sirrah, go fetch him. Zounds, draw you cuts, who shall go? I bid you go, Catesby. Ah, Richard, now mayst thou see thy end at hand. Why, sirs, why fear you thus? Why, we are 10 to 1. If you seek promotion, I am a king already in possession, better able to perform than he. Lovell, Catesby, let's join lovingly and devoutly together, and I will divide my whole kingdom amongst you.
We will, my lord.
We will, my lord. Ah, Catesby, thou lookst like a dog. Thou, Lovell, too. But you will run away with them that be gone, and the devil go with you all. God, I hope. God? What talk I of God, that have served the devil all this while? No. Fortune and courage for me, and join England against me with England. Join Europe with Europe, come Christendom, and with Christendom the whole world. Yet I will never yield but by death only. By death? No. Die, part not childishly from thy crown, but come the devil to claim it, strike him down. And though that fortune hath decreed to set revenge with triumphs on my wretched head, yet death, sweet death, my latest friend, hath sworn to make a bargain for my lasting fame, and this, I, this very day, I hope with this lame hand of mine to rake out that hateful heart of Richmond, and when I have it, to eat it, panting hot with salt, and drink his blood lukewarm, though I be sure 'twill poison me. Sirs, you that be resolute, follow me. The rest, go hang yourselves.
And yes, I think we've reached the low point of Richard's psychological profile here. There's so much in that I absolutely love.
Join England against me with England. Wow.
It's yes, I mean we do have perhaps slightly overuse of revenge earlier, but I think done with pace and with depending on how it's performed, I think that still works. And that stuff with Catesby and Lovell of go and do the kill. No, we regard it don't want to now. I'll give you the kingdom.
All right then.
But how can he follow through? This scene, the dynamic between these people is, because we've talked about at the beginning, him going up, them going, Your Majesty, and fawning from the very beginning. And here we're at the very other end of the scale. He's going down, and he's getting some my lords. That's about it.
He's getting a bit of, though, I love that line of Catesby's, my lord, I did so, and he answered he had another son left to make with Stanley. Because you just know, once upon a time, Catesby would have said, oh, my lord, he declined, or, he wouldn't have actually repeated the insult. Whereas now, he's just like, yeah, I'm just going to tell you what he said, because I think there's not so much respect there as there was. There's not so much toadying. It's fascinating.
Dan, do I see a waving hand?
This was an observation I made yesterday, and I'm not sure if I thought it might bear itself out when we get to Richard about just this mix of verse and prose. And we saw it in the page in the last scene. Starts out in complete verse and then ends in prose there.
I'm sorry, you're cutting out quite a lot. I wasn't making much of that.
So, is that better? Well, we'll see. I was observing yesterday about the mixed verse and prose, and I thought, once we see this with Richard here, and I wondered if there would be a rhyme or reason behind that, because it seems to be quite purposeful in the way it was composed in that sense. I haven't studied the text enough to do it, but I feel like there might be clues to, I guess, at least how one was envisioning it would have been performed, or at least one psychologically how he might have been going.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that quite a lot of this e-text that we have is mislineated, which is why I'd be so keen to look at the Quarto and see if the lineation is the same. I think there's quite a lot of verse lineated as prose here, possibly to save paper.
Well, I wondered the same here, but I mean, well, one, there's the myth about the paper being expensive, which has been not be. The other thing is that this is a fairly short quarto, and there's a lot of space in between stage directions that's been done, not atypical of what Thomas Creed has done in his texts, which is yet another reason to think that this is not, I guess, some sort of bad quarto, so to speak. Seems to be...
I mean, my feeling with this, because you know, in terms of as producing it, what we would do with it is I'd very much like to just say to the actors, you know, it's if it's your dialogue, you decide what you want to do with it or how you want to work with them, play around with it in that sense. I don't really know that there is an answer to how it comes out, and I think to some degree it's not really our province necessarily, unless there is an answer that will be definitely help. Ruth, I see a hand.
Yeah, this isn't to do with the lineation, but I think this is a fantastic scene. You can see Richard almost losing it, you know, as if he was going to go mad, and then just pulling himself back from the brink of that, you know, the thing. One expects somebody who's so psychologically conflicted to go mad, but then he says, you know, frantic man, what meanest thou by this mood? And then he pulls himself back into that kind of revenge thing. You can see how that, you know, like, I'm just going to go out and get Richmond, and that's what I'm going to do. And it's an amazing scene from where you see him psychologically. It's fascinating.
I know, bloody hell, what a speech. I mean, it's almost Marlowe. You can see the Marlowe fanboying in it.
Yitka.
Well, I agree. It's a fantastic scene. I love that pathetic fallacy here, really crafted so very vividly. We have plays where the nature goes crazy to be an omen, to signal something is out of joint. But here the nature is doing very much what it normally does, and Richard's paranoia sees that as scripted conspiracy. And we have that sense of narrowing down, him being in the middle of this grand universe scale conspiracy. And the sense of claustrophobia we talked about yesterday, we ended on that note, is getting narrower, the world darker and narrower. Here it's actually vastly expanded, and everywhere there is threat in the nature for Richard. And I thought that was a fantastic speech.
I mean, you know, that when he's talking about the birds sing not, the silly lambs, you know, all these things, they're all out to get him. And you know, that's
goddamn sheep.
It's that definition. You know, you can think the world is against you and not be mad, but if you think the standard lamp at the side of your bed is out to get you, then you possibly are. And that's also that's the sort of difference. I did see Helen waving earlier before I come to Simon.
Yes,
sure.
It's the fact that everything in the play tells you that the whole battle should be a walkover for Richard, except that Richard has lost his nerve. The only thing wrong with Richard's army is Richard.
Yeah. Simon.
I was just going to say, just picking up on the paranoia, particularly, it's a recurring thing to see people, obviously, as kingly or non-kingly or queenly, and the mentality being as important as strength. So we've seen that. We're speaking of the Marlowe that we've looked at so much, especially with Tamburlaine. Horrible people, horrible stuff, but strength. And I remember when being in Russia, I was playing a role and being told that to get inside the kind of Russian mentality is that there was a respect for strong leadership, no matter the dark side, which was fascinating, which kind of almost brought me back to notions of kind of medieval notions of leadership as well. Strength is not just physical strength, but mental strength, mental fortitude. And if you're questioning yourself, perhaps you're also not fit to rule. I just think it's fascinating when you have this in so many plays, where the one who is full of doubt and paranoia is the model of unfit to rule. It's fascinating.
I saw Yitka's hand. I saw somebody else's as well.
It was just a very quick comment back on what Helen was saying. We might argue historically that the thing that really went wrong was Stanley betraying Richard. So I think that's at the heart of the defeat, historically.
Yeah, yes, I'm not talking about historically, I'm talking about the information we have in the play.
Yeah. Francis, were you?
Yeah, one thing that stuck out for me in the scene was sudden use of legal language, the bond sealed and assigned. The titles doth resign, and who for the fine, spun that.
Oh, and verdicts.
Ah, right, I wondered what that was, of course.
Verdicts.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because earlier in the play we had this thing of, someone, I think it was the page said, without recourse to law, everything's in England's gone horribly wrong. And then towards the end here, it's like these people who've been the instruments of undermining the power and rule of law say, well, it's not legal to do it this way. We'll have to go. We need to go through the office first, and sort of obfuscating there. I find that really interesting.
Just to comment on Richard's kind of Hannibal Lecter moment about, I'll eat it panting hot with salt and drink his blood lukewarm. But then he doesn't do the full Hannibal Lecter because, I'm sure it'll poison me. He has that moment of doubt, which is a fantastic way of ending the scene, I think.
And has there ever been a better exit line than, "Sirs, you that be resolute, follow me. The rest go hang yourselves."
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah. It's I've had enough of this. I'm going for a twist.
You've got the front of the t-shirt and the back of the t-shirt this time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Valentina, did I see you waving earlier, or was that just?
No, yeah, I was just thinking like it's very different, Richard, from what we saw yesterday, and all the use of the legal language actually kind of recalls the fact that he was such an how did we call him, efficient, tyrant before, and now that he's vacillating and more than vacillating, is trying to grab at reality at what it was, recalling the before kind of thing. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We've picked this quite a lot, which is fine. We have now a relatively short scene. Liza, you did ask if you were your mic was too loud. It's not, so long as you're not really going for it. So just possibly lean back if you feel the urge during this scene.
Yes, duly noted. If I go for it, I'll stand back.
Yes.
Because how can you not go for it right now?
Well, exactly. Spoilers for what's about to happen. The battle enters. Richard enters, wounded with his page.
A horse! A horse! A fresh horse!
So fly, my lord, and save your life.
Fly, villain! Look I as though I would fly? No. First shall this dull and senseless ball of earth receive my body cold and void of sense. You watery heavens, roll on my gloomy day, and darksome clouds close up my cheerful sound. Down is thy sun, Richard, never to shine again. The birds whose feathers should adorn my head hovers aloft and dares not come in sight. Yet faint not, man, for this day, if fortune will, shall make thee king, possessed with quiet crown. If fates deny, this ground must be my grave. Yet golden thoughts that reached for a crown, daunted before with by fortune's cruel spite, are come as comforts to my drooping heart, and bids me keep my crown and die a king. These are my last, what more have I to say? I'll make report among the damned souls.
And exit the page, enter Richmond to battle again and kills Richard. Lovely. And that's the scene. So Richard is destined for his car parking space. And the page's presence there, just to help him there and give him a bit of a sounding board, so it's not all just to the audience.
Do we maybe have a missing scene? Do we have a missing scene? Should there be dialogue, do we think, during the Richmond-Richard conflict?
That's what I'm wondering.
It would be nice.
I don't know if you need it. I think that kind of, we've got lots of plays where that final confrontation is just, let's do the fight scene. I'm not saying it's short. It could be go on for ages.
Well, Richard, if you were staging it, Richmond could enter towards the end just on the last couple of lines of Richard's previous speech. And
you need an almost moment from the page to run off, really, there, seeing the Richmond advance.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about the page is that to the end, Richard has someone with him who loves him, who knows he's wrong and probably doomed, and loves him. It's very weird.
Do you think he loves him?
I think he does.
Go that far.
And I wouldn't either. I think he's loyal to him.
Listen to the next scene.
Okay.
Well, so you see, spoilers, Yitka.
I think it's more effective that we don't have a dialogue, that Richard dies in a stage direction, because that means he really dies at, a desperate moment, but there is certain power in him having a long speech, and I do find it quite delightful that what follows is not Richmond saying, "Oh, so I killed him." We have a report. We have a small scene. So Richard dies at certain verbal power, which I quite like, and he really does die like a king. He has that.
You could have music, I suppose. You could have drumming.
Oh, you'll have the proper full pucker fight scene stuff, won't you? You know, you'll do all the things. But yeah, cool. Next scene, shall we go into a report? And the page, and I will apologise in advance, I do seem to have really cocked up on some of the editing on this. Obviously wasn't paying enough attention, so just have a dance.
How may I know the certain true report of this victorious battle fought today? My friend, whate'er thou beest, tell unto me the true report. Which part hath won the victory, whether the king or no?
Ah, no, the king is slain, and he hath lost the day, and Richmond he hath won the field and triumphs like a valiant conqueror.
But who is slain besides our lord and sovereign?
Slain is the worthy Duke of Norfolk, he, and with him Sir Robert Brackenbury, lieutenant of the Tower. Besides Lovell, he made also a partner in this tragedy.
But where's Sir William Catesby?
He is this day beheaded on a stage at Leicester, because he took part with my lord the king. But stay, report, and thou shalt hear me tell the brief discourse, and how the battle fell. Then know, report, that Richard came to field mounted on horseback, with his high resolve as fierce Achilles amongst the sturdy Greeks, whom to encounter worthy Richmond came accompanied with many followers, and then my lord displayed his colours straight, and with the charge of trumpet, drum, and fife, these brave battalions straight encountered. But in the skirmish, which continued long, my lord gan faint, which Richmond straight perceived, and presently did sound a fresh alarm. But worthy Richard that did never fly, but followed honour to the gates of death, straight spurred his horse to encounter with the earl, in which encounter Richmond did prevail. And taking Richard at advantage then, he threw his horse and him both to the ground. And there was worthy Richard wounded, so that after that he ne'er recovered strength. But to be brief, my master would not yield, but with his loss of life he lost the field. Report, farewell.
And so ends the scene. And there's all sorts of questions here about how we connect this with the previous fight scene. You know, the page could have come on and could be with the body.
There's something missing.
I don't know. I don't see that there's anything missing at all. It's the fact that we have this speech reporting about the fight that's just happened.
But then, how would you stage the described fight? I don't know.
Most of that description is before the previous scene. He's describing to the point when he falls off the horse, which is where the scene begins. So literally, the bit he describes in terms of the fight scene is about the last two, 3 lines. But it's just the thing, if the fight scene has happened just now with Richmond and the page actually comes on and is holding, say, Richard's body, when report comes in, that seems to work quite well, so that he's there. And he does talk about Richard well, doesn't he? Worthy Richard that did never fly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, you know, when we think about the battle itself, you know, we can't be, it's one of those elements that, you know, Richard does, you know, he sees Richmond and he goes for him. And it's, you know, it's a question of, is that the sort of fatal decision that he made? Was it Lord Stanley's betrayal, or was it actually just the slightly impetuous thing? Oh, if I kill him myself, I win. Element, which is interesting.
Are you trying to confuse this with history?
No, I think there's a fair amount of you know, detail in here that is not against history.
Yes, I mean the history is that in fact half of Richard's army was still on the road. He was overconfident. He wasn't lacking in confidence. He wasn't shivering in his tent or having nightmares. He was overconfident, and he didn't wait for a good half of his army to arrive. He just said, "Oh, I'll take this lot out today." And in the battle, Stanley held back till he saw which side was going to win.
But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying the page loved him, though. I think he definitely respects him. I think you can argue for it. Liza, you're muted at the moment.
The previous speech, where in the scene where the page talks about Richard's night terrors, there is some very affectionate and pitiful language used there.
I'm willing to be convinced. I go with that. Alan?
Yeah, and the one thing that's ringing slightly different to one or two of the other Richard things we've looked at is Richard does get a slightly better press here in terms of worthy Richard that never did fly. You know, there is a degree of respect for him shown, which some of the others which follows the more Tudor narrative are basically depicting Richard as being a total waste of space.
And it's really interesting because this is, you know, report. Who is report? Tell unto me the true report. This person called report, who's there to check what actually happened. And if we sort of compare with the opening of the play with truth and poetry, and where
I don't know a director alive that wouldn't, if they were doing this now, make that into an Evening Standard seller.
It made me think of those Hollywood films from the 1940s where you suddenly have headlines coming through and
Trilby hat with a press pass tucked in the band.
Yeah, and a flip notebook. Absolutely, yeah. I think Simon's right. There isn't a director alive who won't go for that. Yitka?
It's striking that whatever historian you look at, I mean, chronicler or 17th century historians, even those quite against Richard, this would be the moment when they would say, but yeah, he fought bravely. There is, interestingly, that acknowledgement. But it's, of course, we realize with Page that what he is realizing is that now it's time to write the history, to try to present a voice. And this is the moment he knows that his side lost, and he feels like desperate to insert a bit of that viewpoint that his side had into the Tudor narrative, as it were.
Any additional thoughts before we go into the final scene? We're not going to run all the way through it. There is a point where I will pause for caveats. No, okay, let's go into it. So Richard's dead. Richmond enters with the Earl of Oxford, Lord Stanley and their train with the crown.
Now, noble peers and worthy countrymen, since God hath given us fortune of the day, let us first give thanks unto his deity, and next, with honours fit in your desert, I must be grateful to my countrymen and worthy Oxford for their service shown in hot encountering of the enemy. Earl Richmond binds himself in lasting bonds of faithful love and perfect unity. Sorry I am for those that have lost by our so dangerous encountering with foe, but sorrow cannot bring the dead to life. And therefore are my sorrows spent in vain. Only to those that live, thus much I say, I will maintain them with a manual pay. And loving Father, lastly to yourself, though not the least in our expected aid, we give more thanks for your unlooked for aid. And then we have power on sudden to declare, but for your thanks I hope it shall suffice that I in nature love and honour you.
Well spoken, son, and like a man of worth, whose resolution in this battle past hath made thee famous mongst thy enemies. And think, my son, I glory more to hear what praise the common people gave of thee, than if the peers by general full consent had set me down to wear the diadem. Then live, my son, thus loved of thy friends, and for thy foes prepare to combat them.
And Oxford vows perpetual love to thee, wishing as many honours to Earl Richmond as Caesar had in conquering the world. And I doubt not, but if fair fortune follow thee, to see thee honoured amongst thy countrymen, as Hector was amongst the lords of Troy, or Tully amongst the Roman senators.
How fares our lovely Mother Queen?
And yes, here has entered Mother Queen and Elizabeth.
In health, Earl Richmond, glad to hear the news that God hath given thee fortune of the day. But tell me, lords, where is my son, Lord Marquis Dorset, that he is not here? What, was he murdered in this tragedy?
No, lovely Queen, your son doth live in France, for being distressed and driven by force of tempest to that shore, and many of our men being sick and dead, we were enforced to ask the king for aid, as well for men as for munition, which then the king did willingly supply, provided that as hostage for those men, Lord Marquis Dorset should be pledged with them. But madam, now our troubled war is done. Lord Marquis Dorset shall come home again.
Richmond, gramercies for thy kind good news, which is not little comfort to thy friends to see how God hath been thy happy guide in this late conquest of our enemies. And Richmond, as thou art returned with victory, so we will keep our words effectually.
Then, madam, for our happy battle's victory, first thanks to heaven, next to my forward countrymen. But madam, pardon me, though I make bold to charge you with the promise that you made, which was confirmed by divers of the peers touching the marriage of Elizabeth, and having ended what I promised you, madam, I look and hope to have my due.
Then know, my son, the peers by full consent, in that thou hast freed them from a tyrant's yoke, have by election chosen thee as king. First, in regard they account thee virtuous. Next, for that they hope all foreign broils shall cease, and thou wilt guide and govern them in peace. Then sit thee down, my son, and here receive the crown of England as thy proper own. Sit down.
Henry VII, by the grace of God, King of England, France, and Lord of Ireland, God save the King.
Long live Henry VII, King of England.
Thanks, loving friends and my kind countrymen, and here I vow in presence of you all to root abuses from this commonwealth, which now flows faster than the furious tide that overflows beyond the banks of Nile. And loving Father, and my other friends, whose ready forwardness hath made me fortunate, Richmond will still in honourable love count himself to be at your dispose. Nor do I wish to enjoy a longer life than I shall live to think upon your love. But what saith fair Elizabeth to us? For now we have welcomed our other friends, I must bid you welcome, lady, amongst the rest. And in my welcome crave to be resolved, how you resolve touching my preferred love unto you. Here your mother and the peers agree, and all is ended, if you condescend.
Then know, my lord, that if my mother please, I must in duty yield to her command. For when our aged father left his life, he willed us honour still our mother's age, and therefore, as my duty doth command, I do commit myself to her dispose.
Then hear, my lord, receive thy royal spouse, virtuous Elizabeth, for both the peers and commons do agree that this fair princess shall be wife to thee. And we pray all that fair Elizabeth may live for aye and never yield to death.
And so say I. Thanks to you all, my lords, that thus have honoured Richmond with the crown. And if I live, then make account, my lords, I will deserve this with more than common love.
And now were but my son George Stanley here, how happy were our present meeting then. But he is dead, nor shall I evermore see my sweet boy, whom I do love so dear. For well I know the usurper in his rage hath made a slaughter of my aged joy.
Take comfort, gentle father, for I hope my brother George will turn in safe to us.
I know, my son, he that joys in blood will work his fury on the innocent.
And indeed enter 2 messengers with George Stanley.
But how now? What noise is this?
Behold, Lord Stanley, we bring thy son George Stanley, whom with great danger we have saved from fury of a tyrant's doom.
And lives George Stanley? Then happy that I am to see him freed thus from a tyrant's rage. Welcome, my son, my sweet George, welcome home.
Thanks, my good father. And George Stanley joys to see you joined in this assembly. And like a lamb kept by a greedy wolf within the enclosed center of the earth, expecting death without delivery, even from this danger is George Stanley come to be a guest to Richmond and the rest. For when the bloody butcher heard your honor did refuse to come to him, he like a savage tiger then enraged, commanded straight that I should be murdered, and sent these 2 to execute the deed. But they that knew how innocent I was, did post him off with many long delays, alleging reasons to allay his rage. But 'twas in vain, for he like to a starved lioness still called for blood, saying that I should die. But to be brief, when both the battles joined, these 2 and others shifted me away.
Now, seeing that each thing turns to our content, I will be proclaimed presently that traitorous Richard be by our command drawn through the streets of Leicester, stark naked on a collier's horse, let him be laid. For as of other Spains he had no regard, so let him have a traitor's due reward. Now, for our marriage and our nuptial rites, our pleasure is to be solemnized in our Abbey of Westminster, according to the ancient custom due, the 22nd day of August next. Set forwards then, my lords, towards London straight, there to take further order for the state.
And we'll just pause there before we go into the last sequence of text. George comes in at the vital moment just to give us a really nice, uplifting, it's because, we want Richmond to win, but we don't really care. But George is alive. Yay.
It's really melodramatic. It's really melodramatic. I was quite surprised, actually, that the play took that turn.
Yeah, I kept expecting Cilla Black to pop up.
It's also interesting that he's the one basically giving them the reason to do that pretty horrible thing to Richard's corpse.
Yep.
Basically, it's like he was terrible to George, and now we are doing this to him because he was so very terrible.
And that's historical. Richard was paraded through the streets of York. Richard's body was paraded through the streets of York naked. Leicester. You're right. But he was naked, and the Chronicle says that.
And yes, and there is the good anatomical evidence that people were hitting the body with swords and things, and on the arse potentially as well during that process. So there's nice overlaps with history. I see several hands. Valentina first.
I was just saying that, like, feels very much like Richmond is waiting for an opportunity to stop saying thanks, and. It's very much like, well, he's alive, good. If we had news of his death, then it would be the same thing. Let's get on with it.
Mm. And we've got Elizabeth there, who reappears. Sadly, hasn't had much more to do in the narrative. But it's nice he asks. It's not just it is assumed, but he does actually ask.
He very much portrays himself as the good guy.
Tamara has an objection to that.
Well, I mean, two things. One is the fact that they go out of their way to kind of work in the chronicles about the whole, oh yeah, we paraded a naked corpse around who used to be a king, which is, even by the standards of those days, so they're like, oh, here's a reason, therefore Richmond is still the good guy, because, totally deserved. And Elizabeth she's not that pumped. I mean, you can play it quite flirtatiously, but if you take the dialogue as it is, she's like, well, if my mum says I should marry you, then I'll marry you.
No. She can't look enthusiastic. She has to be modest to be within the proper bounds of a virgin at this time.
That is true.
Again, daring to mention history, I think weren't they quite hot for each other actually in history? Am I right on that one? I think they were. I think it was actually a bit. There was genuine love there. He was very sad when she was dead. Alan.
Yeah, just going back to the Stanley speech just before the coronation happens. I think the last two words are a stage direction rather than
sit down. Yes,
spoken.
they are.
Yeah.
Well, I've got it circled. Yeah, as one of those. Yeah, it's yeah. Otherwise, it's a bit weird.
It just didn't feel right. That's why I hesitated at that point.
Yeah. And we've got some more weirdness about to come up, precisely how this play ends in a moment. Any additional thoughts about this scene?
Yes, a couple.
Yeah.
I'll keep them brief. Firstly, the first half of the scene is very slow. There's a lot of tying up of loose ends that the audience doesn't necessarily care about. We haven't seen Lord Marquis Dorset since his fight with Hastings at Edward's death. We don't necessarily care that he's alive and coming back from exile, although It is in character for the Queen to ask about him.
I did write "Who cares" in my script at that point, but I also it sort of leads on to a thing about we get some French assistance and this. It's sort of fed into it. That said, it does feel awfully tangential.
Yes, and there's a lot of time spent on the marriage of Elizabeth. The Queen first offers, she says, we'll keep our word. Then Richmond is like, I need you to keep your word, when the Queen just said she would. Yeah. Then Stanley interjects saying, you're the king now, sit down on your throne. He does, he's proclaimed. And then he says, Elizabeth, will you marry me? And she's like, yeah, if Mom says. Incidentally, my hobby horse, lineation. The Queen's speech after Elizabeth says yes to the marriage. For both the peers and commons do agree that this fair princess shall be wife to thee, and we pray all that fair Elizabeth may live for aye and never yield to death. That rhymes, and in our e-text it's lineated as prose. So I think there's evidence. If the Quarto also has it as prose, I think there may be evidence for it being assembled from foul papers, where the verse wasn't written out, again, possibly to save space.
Sorry, have you got it lineated in prose?
I
haven't. I haven't sent out a different script to everyone, have I?
I thought that was one of the bits I had to relineate.
No, I've got it in first.
Okay, good. Cool. Well,
this has happened before, so just want to flag that one up. Dan,
just to quickly adjust the whole foul papers thing. The Paul Werstein's book pretty much discredits the entire idea of it. So I wouldn't get, and we were discussing this a little bit, or at least I was mentioning a little yesterday, that there doesn't seem to be anything out of order with this text. It has been quite debated as something that's been called a so-called bad quarto, but there's nothing to me that suggests, and to others, that this is complete or there's something wrong with it. There might have been portions of it that were cut for whatever reason, for performance or because somebody didn't like it, but there isn't anything, the marks of memorial reconstruction or other things, the normal hallmarks like external repeated lines or external factors or whatever, that have some sort of crept into text really aren't there for it.
Yes, I mean it's not very tidy, but there doesn't seem to be anything fundamentally wrong with it, and it seems to now that we're at the end, we've got a little bit to do. It feels pretty complete to me. I'm going to put forces on because we've got a slightly odd closing. We're almost into epilogue territory here. The two messengers who have some dialogue, and then we've got dialogue that seems to be possibly for Elizabeth the Queen, but could also that could be just an error. I'm going to ask you to read it as is, which means the messenger gets to speak twice. So I'll briefly interject when the messenger, who is currently just Helen, will pause when she turns into a completely different messenger. So Helen, messenger number one, please.
Thus, gentles, may you here behold the joining of these houses, both in one, who by this Prince Henry VII, who was for wit compared to Solomon, his government was virtuous in every way, and God did wondrously increase his store. He did subdue a proud rebellious lord that did encounter him upon Blackheath. He died when he had reigned full 23 years, 8 months and some odd days, and lies buried at Westminster. He died and left behind a son.
And now the baton passed to a completely different messenger.
A son he left, a Harry of that name, a worthy, valiant and victorious prince. For on the 5th year of his happy reign he entered France, and to the Frenchman's costs he won Touraine and Tournay. The emperor served this king for common pay, and as a mercenary prince did follow him. Then after Maul and Morlaix conquered he, still did keep the Frenchmen at bay, and lastly in this king's decreasing age, he conquered Boulogne. And after, when he was turned home, he died, when he had reigned full 38 years, 9 months and some odd days, and was buried at Windsor. He died and left 3 famous sprigs behind him. Edward VI, he did restore the gospel to his light, and finish that his father left undone. A wise young prince, given greatly to his book. He brought the English service first in use, and died when he had reigned 6 years, 5 months, and some odd days, and lieth buried in Westminster.
Next after him, a Mary did succeed, which married Philip, King of Spain. She reigned 5 years, 4 months, and some odd days, and is buried in Westminster. When she was dead, her sister did succeed.
Worthy Elizabeth, a mirror in her age, by whose wise life and civil government her country was defended from the cruelty of famine, fire and sword, war's fearful messengers. This is that queen, as writers truly say, that God had marked down to live for aye. Then happy England, mongst thy neighbour isles, for peace and plenty still attends on thee. And all the favourable planet smiles to see thee live in such prosperity. She is that lamp that keeps fair England's light, and through her faith her country lives in peace. And she hath put proud Antichrist to flight, and been the means that civil wars did cease. Then, England, kneel upon thy hairy knee, and thank that God that still provides for thee. The Turk admires to hear her government and babies in jewelry sound her princely name. All Christian princes to that prince hath sent, after her rule was rumoured forth by fame. The Turk hath sworn never to lift his hand to wrong the princess of this blessed land. 'Twere vain to tell the care this queen hath had in helping those that were oppressed by war, and how her majesty hath still been glad when she had heard of peace proclaimed from far. Geneva, France, and Flanders hath set down the good she hath done since she came to the crown, for which, if e'er her life be ta'en away, God grant her soul may live in heaven for aye. For if Grace's days be brought to end, your hope is gone, on whom did peace depend.
And thus we found our first very definite cut. So I think this is fascinating, all of this. I don't have any firm conclusions about why or what's going on here, or precisely whether what's going on with the speakers. Thoughts that have come up. But I sort of kind of think the play really ends with Richmond's last line, and I wouldn't put any of this in a modern production. So
Could
it's
it
really
perhaps have
interesting.
been added? Would it have been added for an audience with the Queen? I'm assuming it's dated from her reign, of course. Could that have been a hello? Please don't chop our heads off. Here's a great play. Hope you liked it. Even if you didn't, we like you. Thanks.
Or alternatively, hope you like this. Give us some money.
Well, England is kneeling on its hairy knees. So
on its hairy knee.
It's
Yes,
hairy
I know
knee.
the feeling.
What a line!
Yeah,
I love that.
You see, I don't see this in the way that you see it at all. In that, I see the entire point of the play being, this is the Queen that writers truly say that God hath marked down, and so on. Because what the play is trying to say to its audience is, aren't we lucky to live under a monarch when are not in the middle of a civil war? And
that
we
makes a
must
lot of
hope
sense.
that she lives forever and ever and ever, because she hasn't got an heir, and we are stuffed if she drops dead now. Totally stuffed.
Yitka, I saw a hand.
Yeah, well, I agree with this, that it ends on a depressing note. This is, the mid-90s, and people were wondering what was going to happen because the succession wasn't settled. I was just amused when I read, the way they presented history. Again, we are back to that eternal question, and the way they just brushed over Mary.
She was there a bit. Don't matter.
Let's not give any comment, but she got married and then she died. And
Lady Jane Grey didn't get a mention at all, I noticed. For obvious reasons.
Ruth.
Just the three speeches from the two messengers and then from Elizabeth, they just do this amazing generic shift where they become like chronicle or annals entries, reign for so many days and hours and months and so on. And that's very weird. It's kind of like report. You'd think it was like a kind of giving a historical report of what's gone on.
I mean, it's a shame that it's not truth and poetry coming back in, or could be made to be that. I particularly love all the stuff about Henry in France, and I'm going, yes, that was a really important bit of history there. Alan.
Yeah, I must admit, I was quite surprised that it wasn't actually a reprise of Truth who'd opened the play.
Right.
Because I think that would actually work better.
Well, could the two messengers be truth and poetry?
They take the hat off. They were in disguise the whole time. Yeah, could be. I mean, it's this, the question of who the speakers are as well. The dialogue seems to be applied to Elizabeth and the Queen at that point there, but it still seems very weird.
As you've commented in the past, it will be difficult for this not to sound a bit muffled.
But I think that's enough to be said about that. Let's talk about in our final thoughts, because we're into extra time. Overall, the play itself, the overall shape of it, what you might want to do with it, thinking caps on, any just general final thoughts. Try and keep it cogent, as it were. Dan, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Can you skip me for now? Because
I'll skip you for now. Anyone want to volunteer? Helen.
The start seems a very long way away.
It was 2 days ago.
Yeah, but it seems a lot longer.
Mm.
It's been a journey.
Mm. Yeah. Journey into darkness and back out into light.
Mm.
And it does keep playing that question. I don't know if it keeps playing the question of what is true and what is not, but it does keep playing, you know, why do people do things, and how, you know, what and their motives, and how do you end up in this situation on a quite, you know, detailed level. It's not, oh, here is a tyrant being a tyrant, rah. It's actually how everyone is complicit in how a tyrant coming together. I found that really interesting. Liza, any final thoughts from you, being Richard today?
Oh, I really enjoyed this, and yeah, I mean, yeah, this play is basically just a banger. It cranks the dial to 11 and then cranks it further till it breaks off. I like how human the characters are. I think it's at its best when the characters are at their most human. But yeah, basically, if I were handed this to direct, I would actually be excited about it. Or if I were handed this to be in, I'd be even more excited.
Sarah, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think I'd be excited about directing it as well. I think it'd be, well, I'm saying it'd be fairly easy to direct. I think the first 2 days would be extremely easy to direct. I was so riveted yesterday by this. Today, I wasn't so riveted, I have to say. I thought Richard had some fantastic speeches, and I liked his descent into paranoia. But once we got to the actual Battle of Bosworth, maybe it's because, you know, we all know what happens or whatever, I don't know, but I kind of felt it settled into a more conventional history play. And I think you'd have to work quite hard to make that final section come alive. I mean, there are ways of doing it, for sure, but that you wouldn't really need to rack your brains, I don't think, for the first 2/3, 3/4 of it, because it's just a cracking play, and the psychology of the characters, the way the psychology develops, is fascinating. You don't often see that in these early modern plays. And also, we've talked about it a lot already, but the way it kind of involves everybody from low estate to high. I always like it when that happens. So yeah,
I think it's interesting about this particular session, because we've actually done, because we're doing very little text in actually one session. It's quite short. We spent a lot of time on actually not a lot. So I think when it comes to Battle of Bosworth itself, you know, the coverage of that is 1, 2, 3 relatively short scenes, actually, and a sort of post one as well. And that actually, in a sense, it feels longer than it is. It's actually very compact. It comes on us very, very quickly. The actual getting to the battle itself. And so I think there's a momentum actually in this last day that we have artificially taken out of the play. And I think that's something that actually future workshop, that'd be really interesting to find. Valentina, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and like I would love to see this put on stage. And I think the thing that strikes me the most is it's very clear from what happens that power and status come from how many people do you have that are your friends. And I think once you put it on stage, that's going to be even more clear, because I think like the stage kind of like depletes of people as Richard is going more and more insane. And while on Richmond's side, you start with 2 people and you get more and more. And that is fascinating. And the characters are well written as well. So.
Yeah. It's really interesting also that Richard is never really surrounded by other noblemen. He's always surrounded by his sort of intermediaries and sort of middle-ranking characters as well. Whereas, you know, Richmond, okay, he doesn't have a lot of people around him per se, but, you know, they're all of a higher status. And that I find quite interesting. And of course, that doesn't mean there aren't more people on stage. I mean, that's just sort of the primary drivers. There's a question of stage picture and how many actors we've got and how we can do that. I think there's some really, really interesting issues there. Tamara, final thought.
I think I agree with Sarah in that you kind of have to stick the landing for this one if you were to put it on stage. It felt a little bit abrupt, which you can obviously deal with easily with a good fight director and making something of the battle that in this kind of forum we're not able to replicate or even sketch. I really like the fact that the play creates a situation and almost entraps all the players. So there is no sense, I think we've talked about this before, but there's no sense that Richard is driving the plot as this supervillain who is, you know, I want the crown and that's what I do, and this is how I'm going to do it. But he's surrounded by people who go, Your Majesty, and he's like, and obviously I've talked about that yesterday as well, about the because I got to do that bit with him looking at the crown, putting it on, and first it's, well, I've got it now, and then it devolves into this paranoia and the whole I'm not on the side of God anymore sort of thing. But it felt like he was pushed into it almost, and I feel like most of the characters are kind of stuck in their situation and just deal with the circumstances.
Is history driving us, or are we driving history? Ruth, final thoughts from you?
Well, I agree with Liza that I think it's a banger of a play. I think it's great. And what Sarah said about, you know, the psychology of it, I think is fascinating. I think that one becomes very involved in that. I think for me, I'm very struck by the fact that there's no subplot as such, but it's a very rich play in terms of, you know, Shaw's wife, the page with those kind of asides to the audience, involving the audience. And there are lots of different perspectives. There's quite a lot of nuance. It's not just, and the family relationships. I want to think a lot more about how the play is using, you know, family and getting family together at the end. Because, you know, if this was the Middle Ages, you'd be having all these kind of analogies going on between government, you know, political government and government in the household. And I don't think this play is doing that, but I want to think a lot more about how it's using the family relationships.
Simon, as a slightly fighty person, any final thoughts from you?
Very, but I'll surprise you in that I would go completely opposite way. It's probably I've been swayed by my seed sown in my directorial brain about the Evening Standard seller, but I think it's crying out to be made about a megalomaniacal media owner. And I would maybe set it in a press office as somebody who used to work in one. I just think there's a lot to do with kind of reportage in this and power struggle, and I like doing unconventional things anyway, but I think with all the messages, all the pages, all the things that we've been speaking about, I think it's almost crying out to be done in that kind of style, and that would be fun.
Yes, there's an awful lot of people who are sort of controlling the message, or at least passing on the message, and Ruth's there. I think there's thoughts there. Francis, final thought.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this play, and it has not disappointed. I loved it. Lots of well-drawn characters and lots of meaty scenes. And like Sarah and Liza, I would love to be in the production of this.
Excellent. More thumbs up for immediate production. Alan, final thought.
Yeah, it's been enjoyable. I think one could retrospectively do Creed under the Trade Descriptions Act, because the précis at the beginning is not that close to what happens. And the other thought I had was that if it was done as a stage production, I think it would need some fairly extensive program notes to explain who the heck was who and who's related to who, to try and make some sense of a lot of it, because obviously some of it was common knowledge at the time of the original production, but is no longer, common knowledge for most people.
Yes, there are several points where, how do we leap over that in production terms? I think a lot of them are not insuperable in terms of, once you put people in relation to each other and, costuming and that. But yes, there are moments where it's a little confusing as to precisely who is who in relation to whom. Yitzka, final thought?
I absolutely love this reading out, and it's a great play. I would love to see it performed. It, so much that I would like to say, but I will keep it brief. It was interesting to hear your thoughts as performers on the sense of how to do the ending, because it feels too abrupt. And in some ways, for me, it reinforces the sense that this is real. We are so drawn to Richard that the ending, it's almost anticlimactic, partly because we know what happens, so we are not surprised. And I wonder whether the following stuff, the analysis after his death, is there partly to rebalance the sense of the play ends with Richard's death. I think maybe that's what they were trying not to say. It's wonderful, rich. It really shows loads of layers, and I know this is probably not feasible, but it would be interesting to pair it with the poem The Bosworth Field, which focuses just on the battle and shows people loyal to Richard who often don't feature in drama for some reason. So that would be an interesting comparison.
Yes, Bosworth Field is one where we have started work on, and it probably wouldn't be paired explicitly with this, but it will probably happen at some point as some kind of performance piece, because it is very, very stageable, and quite looking forward to turning that one over.
We did some on that, didn't we, Rob?
Yeah. But though in that sense, that's one where really sitting down and figuring out precisely who is who in relation to what is even more vital in advance, because it really does dive into that and uses names in a slightly confusing way at times. But yes, I'm absolutely content to go forward with all of these various Richards. I think the fundamental problem is Richmond only enters very late in the game. We don't fundamentally care about Richmond, and when Richard is dead, it's that thing of there is a bit of a hanging ending there. Would we dare, cutting the rest of the final scene, just end it with a page clutching Richard? He was a good man, really. He loved his mother.
I do love how everybody loves Richard so much, and it's just, even historically, he wasn't the tyrant. Apparently, am I wrong? People keep telling me he wasn't the tyrant that everybody made him out to be.
He lost.
Mixed.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, he did do a usurping thing. So he's not a nice person, but that doesn't mean his rule was full of terrible tyrannies. Yeah,
in ruling, not worse than anybody else.
Rule desperately long. Dan, a final thought. We're very over extra time.
As someone who visited the car park a week after they announced,
couldn't get a space for anything. I mean, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, I actually waited. There was no queue actually when I showed up. I couldn't believe it. 45 minutes before they were going to open. It was the second weekend, and then there was a huge queue after me. I was right at the front then, but I didn't want to be disappointed, and I wasn't at all. I'll try not to repeat anything that anyone else has said, apart from I'll just add on to the point that Ruth had made about the idea that there wasn't a plot there. And this is a really tight text. It's really short, and I'm most interested in, as anyone who's read with me knows, that I'm interested in this as from a theatrical historical standpoint as well as a book history standpoint. We've done a lot of Queen's Men's plays, and we've done a lot of printings by Thomas Creed. I'm interested to see how they fashioned this for their ensemble. I'm interested to see how this fits in the Queen's repertoire. I'm interested to see, especially because this is a disputed text, and I do not see a problem with it, how it fits in with so-called other disputed texts, as well as other texts that we know have actually been based on documents, on manuscripts that were actually prepared for performance. So, apart from that,
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I find it really, really interesting. You know, especially having done so many Queen's plays. You know, and you know, the feel of it and the feel of the company and the kind of stuff they're performing. It really, and we're not quite at the end of that journey yet, but you know, we are getting close to having done, you know, all the putative texts. You know, give it a month and or so, and we'll be there. I did have another thought, which I've lost. Dan, anything more? You're waving.
Well, so no, sorry to cut you off because you had another thought there. Just the other thing is that it didn't fall with all the other Queensland's texts that we have read, and it didn't fall into certain of those conventions, like the idea that some clown is going to come in and fill in a lot of space. Things like that. It didn't fit in with a lot of the other history plays that we had read. With that coming so far, yet it was still quite a banger.
Yeah, I just about got that. You're definitely, you do keep fading out in a weird way. But yeah, the sense that there isn't an active clown figure, and whereas some the other plays do. I mean, it reminded me very much in style to parts of the King Lear, actually, in that sense, which, you know, does have its funnies, but it's not. And you know, there seems to be an awful lot of overlap there. I wouldn't say it's actually desperately a short play. I mean, it's a good 20,000 words. It's not short by any stretch of the imagination. There are considerably shorter. I mean, it's not quite twice the length of Battle of Alcazar, but you know, it's in that area.
But it is short in terms of, I mean, when you look at some of the other history plays, apart from, well, I'm not going to mention it.
Yeah. Not by that much. A few thousand words. And you know, it is slightly shorter, but it's. I wouldn't pull it by a margin where you'd go, this is shorter in that sense. In terms of numbers game, but I can sit down and do the numbers game later, I suppose. We have the technology. Any final fun, because we are very, very over time now. Anyone desperate to say anything? Okay, we could talk about this forever, and I'm sure we're going to be doing more with this anon. Thank you very much to all my readers, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.